For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris Cole, and I try to organize things here for the imaging group. And tonight I'm going to talk about imaging and solar wavelengths. Okay, so I did this same talk about 2 years ago, and but this one we're just going to like more dwell on the imaging aspect, not necessarily just observing. So imaging and solar wavelengths. So let's see what we got here. This thing will work. Well, I guess it's not going to. So first off, you always have to say this. You don't want to point your telescope towards the sun, because you'll destroy your camera in the case of imaging, or your eyeball if you want to like look through it. So, yeah. There are exceptions, of course, because after all, that's what Galileo did when he first started drawing pictures of what the sun looked like for the first time. Nobody knew what a sunspot was, but he figured it out, and so yeah. Galileo, I guess, got away with it, and because still had both of his eyes afterwards. Anyway, yeah, imaging and solar wavelengths. So I'm only going to talk about three wavelengths tonight that are most common. I mean, in the hobby also, or in the observing aspect of the hobby as well. So we got white light, which is basically all the wavelengths, but what you can see in white light are features that can be accentuated when you use a continuum filter that filters at a wavelength of 540 nanometers and rejects everything else and allows 540 nanometer wavelength to come through. So if you remember the electromagnetic spectrum, 540 nanometers is about on the green, pretty square on the green section of the spectrum. And so the other two, the most popular one is probably hydrogen alpha, 656 nanometers, which is pretty deep red color. And then finally calcium K is 393 nanometers, or just about ultraviolet in color. So, and because of that, as far as visually, the white light, including white light plus your continuum filter on the front of it, you can see pretty much everything that you could catch on camera, and the same goes for hydrogen alpha. But calcium K, it's really, really hard to see features visually on the sun, because it's just a really dark purplish blue disc is what you're seeing. Now, people, if you're like in your 20s or you're in your teens or whatever, it's said that the younger you are, the better your lens will be in filtering through distinct colors of the spectrum. Because as you get older, the lens that's in your eyeball starts to turn yellow. And basically, if you already know from the RGB additive color scheme, and you're playing with it in like Photoshop or PixInsight, the opposite of blue is, well, yellow. And because of that, if your lenses are turning yellow as you get older, yeah, of course, you're not going to really see anything blue and shorter wavelengths, which in the case of calcium K, that's a pretty short wavelength. So it's beyond your reach. But when you're younger, you could probably see more detail. Or if you've had cataract surgery, you could probably see more detail. In fact, some people say that when they've had cataract surgery, they seem to recollect that they probably never saw color this vivid before in their whole life, including when they were younger. But anyway, okay, so I'm rambling there. But yeah, you see this picture to the right. These are different wavelengths that are can be recorded by different filters, but again, some of these filters are just not really ready for the consumer market per se. Let's see, like this guy right here, that's probably calcium K. I'm pretty sure that's calcium K. Let's see, probably like this. This is a little closer to hydrogen alpha. But it isn't. I'll go ahead and tell you that it isn't. I can't remember what wavelength that is, but that's kind of what hydrogen alpha looks like. We'll see pictures of that. And then right here, this is about white light, and it's not very detailed there. I mean, well, you're only looking at just a tiny square there, but yeah, right here, that's what white light would look like. But with a continuum filter, if you put that in place, you'll see a little more detail. So anyway, okay, enough of that. So white light continuum. We'll start with the white light, and we'll talk about the continuum filter that you can add on the front of it. So it's a good representation of the photosphere or the sun's surface. If you want to get down to what you're actually seeing, beyond what we like talking about here in images, making things look pretty, making it into eye candy. But no, scientifically speaking, you're looking at the features that are on the surface of the sun. So white light solar filters reveal sunspots and granulation. Granulation, you'll see in some of the images are, they look like granules on the surface of the sun, basically. And then sunspots, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. You'll see sunspots with that are, the actual spot being black, and then you'll see them that they have a pulsing halo going around them as well, which if you were to do a time lapse of that halo, you would see movement over a period of a few hours. It's very subtle. It's nowhere near as dynamic as hydrogen alpha. But anyway, white light filters just by themselves are pretty inexpensive. And like I was saying, if you add a continuum filter in front of it, that filter is at 540 nanometers, it'll bring out what you're seeing that the white light is letting you see in the first place. It'll bring out the detail and accentuate the surface of the sun, the features that you would see. So here's your typical run-of-the-mill Mylar filter film. So they're very inexpensive when you compare to any other solar filter. I mean, white light filters are a good way to start in the solar observing and imaging hobby, because they're, white light filters are not that expensive. But of course, this is a Mylar film, so it's not like solid or anything like that. It's an actual almost tissue-like. Okay, it's just a sheet of material. It's Mylar, right? So you need to be careful with it. You don't want to punch any holes in it or anything like that. Anyway, you can also buy the actual sheets that you see here on the filter and like make your own cell if you wanted to. Some people do that with really large telescopes because, it's a nice do-it-yourself project, and some people can think, well, I can do this at home because I already have a 3D printer or whatever, and I can do it more cheap than just buying one that's pre-made. And also, some people just buy the film and they go ahead and just take the film and make it for all their telescopes if they have more than one. So, but another thing that I'm going to show you in a later slide is what's called a Herschel wedge, which also shows white light as well. The reason why I'm bringing it up right now is the Herschel wedge. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and show it to you. That's what it looks like. It's a diagonal. Okay, it's not a Mylar filter like this. Now, this last point that I have here on the slide is that this is the best filter to use for focusing before a solar eclipse reaches totality. The reason why that is obviously you don't want to focus with this because then, when totality comes up, you have to remove it and you have to put in your camera and then you have to refocus it. That's just a really bad idea. So, because, totality, it's a priceless moment. You have to be well prepared for it. It's like moments like that, like a Venus transit or a Mercury transit. In this case, totality, it's like a NASA mission. You only get one chance at it. So you need to be well prepared. So if you're going to go out and observe the sun as the moon is starting to cover up before and after totality, this is what I would recommend. So, and that way you can go ahead and hook up your camera and get it focused and ready. And once totality kicks in, you can remove it. Start taking images of the eclipse and totality. So anyway, but getting back to the Herschel wedge, the nice thing about it is it's a nice all-in-one unit. It is more expensive than Mylar. Basically, it kind of like reflects the sun over a different number of surfaces, and then it reflects it up and out of here. This is where you would attach an eyepiece or a camera if you wanted to do it like that. If you want to record the sun using one of these guys, the Herschel wedge. Yeah, I don't fully understand exactly how it works, but it's yeah, it's a nice all-in-one unit. I mean, it's really affordable, but yeah, it is expensive. So this only works with the refractors, okay? Whereas the Mylar one, you can use it on any kind of telescope. You can use it on a Schmidt-Cassegrain. You can use it on an RC if that's your desire or whatever. You can use it on Newtonian. You can use it on a refractor as well. But Herschel wedges here, they are only good for refractors. So you don't want to use it for anything else. Basically, the reason why that is almost all the other ones, all the other telescopes out there are mirror telescopes. So they're taking sunlight and you're bouncing it back and forth inside of a tube. So it's going to get pretty hot, pretty damn quick. So yeah, it won't work. Trust me, don't do it. And but anyway, okay, yeah. So you can only use it with refractors now. Two brands that I've looked through a Vader one a long time, or a Botter one a long time ago. But this brand that you see pictured here, this one is the one I have. It's made by Lump, and both of the cases, the Botter one, BAADER, that's the name of the brand, Herschel wedge, and then this one, the Lump one, which is the one I have, LUNT, Lump Solar Systems. That's the name of that company. When you look through it with a eyepiece, it's going to be very bright. Now, when I say very bright, no, you're not looking directly at full-fledged sunlight. You're not going to burn your eyeballs out. I mean, that's the whole point of a Herschel wedge, so you can look at the sun safely. But it will be very bright. So what is kind of recommended is you get a polarizing filter for it. They sell stacked polarizing filters on various amateur telescope equipment sites like Orion, Meade, and well, Orion has Meade now. So, but anyway, like Orion, for example, and you can buy polarizing filters from them. Lunt Telescopes also, or Lunt Solar Systems that makes this wedge, they sell them as well. And that'll just tone down the brightness if you want to look at it with your own eyes, and so it won't be as overwhelming. But you can also use what's termed a neutralizing filter. But the advantage of a polarizing filter is that you're able to adjust the quote brightness of the image. You would notice this if you screw a polarizing filter on your on an eyepiece and put it into a Herschel wedge. And all you have to do is just put the eyepiece into a Herschel wedge and just leave it a little loose. You don't need to secure it all the way. Just leave it a little loose. And if you twist the eyepiece, you'll see the brightness of the sun go from really bright to not so bright, and where it's more comfortable to look at the features that you're seeing. You will need a polarizing filter also, or neutral density filter. That's the one that basically neutral density filter is just almost like sunglasses. It's just like smoked glass, pretty much. But you'll need one of these if you want to just take images of the sun without using a continuum filter, because just like like your eyes, if you were to look at it with a eyepiece only, it's going to be very bright. Whereas if you put a camera in there, it's going to be very bright for it too. There's like I tried it in fire capture once just to see what would happen, and there's no way you can make that image or the actual feed of the recording that you would get from imaging planets, moons, and in this case the sun. It'll just be so bright that the software program just does not have the capability to turn that brightness down. They're going to have a polarizing filter in front of it to fix that. Anyway, so again, an important point right here is the last one. It's aperture dependent. The bigger your Herschel wedge, the larger the aperture it can handle. So just before you buy one, make sure that you read the what the manufacturer suggests as far as aperture goes for what the Herschel wedge can handle. So, say like if you have I don't know, let's say like you have a 50 millimeter aperture telescope, 50 millimeters in diameter, almost the size of your like standard finder scope that you would have on a larger telescope in the hobby. You could use, the smaller model of the Herschel wedge. Now, if you take that smaller model and you put it on an aperture that's like 5 inches in diameter, then that Herschel wedge is going to get hot really quick. Okay, now, I mean, you can get around that with using what's called a stop-down mask, where it's basically an apparatus that you just place in front of the main lens of the refractor, and the hole is smaller. So say like your refractor is like 5 inches, and you have a small Herschel wedge, and you need to make the amount, you need to decrease the amount of light that's coming in. You just take a stop-down mask that's say like, oh, I don't know, maybe like 3 inches in diameter, and put that stop-down mask in it, and there you go. You have an opening that's only going to allow in 3 inches worth of quote sunlight. So anyway, hopefully that you understand that. One of the things. Yeah. What's up?
Here's a Herschel wedge, like, okay, but you notice this is a 2-inch one.
Okay, yeah, that's the same one I got. So yeah.
So you need, your telescope needs to be able to handle a 2-inch opening like this. And they're not exactly small, they're pretty heavy. All right. And then of course you have your lens that goes onto it, and this one has a polarizing filter on it that would just fit into here. So you've got this whole unit that you're putting onto your telescope, and so your mount, or however you're going to, this is pretty heavy. So if you're going to do something like this, you need to have a mount that can handle the weight.
I would say, wouldn't you say it weighs like 2 pounds at least, or something like that? I mean,
it's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you definitely need to make sure that the mount that you've got can handle both the weight of your telescope and the weight of a Herschel wedge, because it's not lightweight.
I mean, if you, as far as like, I mean, making sure that the Herschel wedge, or as far as wondering about what telescope or what size Herschel wedge you can get, you can just take the easy way out, although it's going to be expensive, and just get the biggest one. So, because then it'll work with the small ones, it'll work with the big ones. But like Steve pointed out, with that big one right there, which is the one I have as well, it's only has a 2-inch barrel on it. So if you have a telescope that has a 1 1/4 inch draw tube for the focuser, well, it's only 1 1/4 inch in diameter, or 2 inches, not going to fit in there. So you're stuck with just using the 2-inch version of a Herschel wedge. But anyway, okay, so there's that. So here's the what the continuum filter looks like. As I said, it was green, and obviously you can't use this by itself. Okay, so you can't just like buy this as a solar continuum filter and say, oh, this is all I need, and you just put it in your eyepiece and you look through the telescope with it. Well, your eyeball is gone if you do that, and your camera is gone if you do that. So yeah, you need to have the Mylar filter that I talked about earlier, or a Herschel wedge blocking it. Now the Bayer solar continuum filter is pretty dark. So if you use this and you want to look at it visually, you won't need a polarizing filter with it, nor if you want to take your camera and image the sun with it through the Herschel wedge or the Mylar filter that's on the front of the telescope. You won't need the polarizing filter for it either. So, but anyway, but yeah, that's what that looks like. So we'll look at some examples of that later. Let's see. Okay, so now we move on to what a lot of people like, the hydrogen alpha wavelength. Now you probably saw at the beginning of the meeting, the beam was and Steve were showing you examples of what hydrogen alpha looks in, the different kind of nebulae that you can take images in the sky. That's called narrowband imaging. Well, if I were to make up a term, a hydrogen alpha solar filter is almost like ultra narrowbanding, because narrowband, again, it basically rejects all the wavelengths except the one that's made to pass through. So in the case of hydrogen alpha, or their solar filter, and just like the nebula filter that Nadine just showed, it blocks everything else and allows 656 nanometer wavelength to come through only. All right, so now depending on the filter that you're using, going off on a tangent here, for like nebulae, you can have what's termed a hydrogen alpha that has a 7 nanometer bandpass, which means that the hydrogen alpha filter that you would use for nebulae, 7 nanometer bandpass, that means you're going to have a 656 nanometer wavelength coming through. That's what you want, but it's also going to what's also going to trickle in are wavelengths that are like 3.5 nanometers to the right and 3.5 nanometers to the left. So it's going to allow in some wavelengths that are not specific to 656 nanometers. Okay, so 7 nanometer narrowband filter for nebula is pretty common. The most, of course, as you can imagine, the more narrower it gets to pinpoint on the actual wavelength that you're interested in, the more expensive the filter. So I said 7 nanometer filter. You can probably get one of those for like a 1 1/4 one. I think you can get one for I don't know, less than $150. I'm pretty sure it's not that expensive compared to do what?
5 nanometer is about $450.
Yeah.
And 3 nanometer is $750.
Yeah. So yeah, as soon as it gets more narrow, the price goes up. Now, to take it to the next level, a hydrogen alpha filter that's used for looking at the sun is even narrower. It's like tenths of a nanometer. So it's very, very narrow. That's basically just because that's what's required to look at the sun. I don't understand exact reasons for that, but it needs to be very narrow to be able to be able to see the features on the sun in the hydrogen alpha wavelength. So, but getting down to what the wavelength's all about, it's a great representation of dynamic hydrogen activity in the solar chromosphere. So basically, it's a layer of hydrogen that's off the photosphere, okay, the surface of the sun. And one of the, I think it's called the Chandler mission that went to the sun. One of the mysteries that it wanted to really solve is that the further you get away from the surface of the sun and you're getting out into the chromosphere, it actually gets hotter. So it's kind of weird how that works, and that's one of the reasons why they sent that probe out there to figure out, well, why is that? Well, why is it the temperature hotter away from the sun than it is from the surface? But anyway, that's where the hydrogen alpha wavelength resides, and so yeah, it's a very dynamic it's a very dynamic look at the sun. So anyway, and this shows you all kinds of things. It shows you sunspots, prominences. If you're not familiar with solar terminology, prominences look like these little flames are coming off the edge of the sun, but they're not. It's just plasma. It's just pieces of the sun that are coming up and either going out into space or the magnetic field is just pulling it back in. So you'll see like loops where the prominence is coming out in one spot and then it's crashing into another spot on the sun. But anyway, yeah, so it shows sunspots, shows prominences, shows spicules. I'll try to go into what these all look like if I can remember. And the thing I like most is it shows you flare events. So it'll show you what solar flares look like. And I'll show you an example of that. But solar flares are basically gigantic explosions on the sun. So just picture, if I were just to make a random example, think of the Hiroshima bomb, but instead of just destroying Hiroshima, it blankets the whole Earth instead. So these explosions are huge. So that gives you an idea of some of the stuff you can see with hydrogen alpha. So it's pretty cool. And like I said, if you pay attention with it visually, yeah, you can start to see that things are changing over time. Now, hydrogen alpha, with all these wavelengths I'm talking about, previously talked about the 540 nanometer wavelength of the white light filter. You can filter it out to 540 with a solar continuum filter. By the way, that's usually the largest filter, the 2-inch filter for a continuum. It's usually about $200 and lower if you want to get the smaller one. So it's nowhere near as expensive as hydrogen alpha. But hydrogen alpha filters are really, as far as for solar observing, are really expensive. And because of that, they usually make telescopes that are just purely made for looking at the sun only. So you can buy small ones that usually cost a decent one, costs around $700, and it just goes up in price after that. So it's pretty expensive, but if you want to see incredible looks of the sun, yeah, hydrogen alpha is the way to go. And as I was talking earlier about the narrowband filters that you use for nebulae, again, like I said, hydrogen alpha solar or a hydrogen alpha filter for solar is incredibly narrow, and just like the nebulae filters, the narrower the bandpass of the 656 nanometer, that is hydrogen alpha, the higher the cost. Okay, so the one I have is 0.7 not nanometers, 0.7 angstroms. Angstroms are a tenth of a nanometer. So it's 0.07 nanometers is the bandpass of the hydrogen alpha filter that I use for looking at the sun. And they get narrower, and they can get narrower too. I mean, it's like, I think the lowest one I've ever seen was like 0.2 angstroms. So and those things are crazy in price. They're like several thousands of dollars, and it's just like, well, whatever. I think I'll just stick with what I have. So, but here's an example of one type of dedicated solar telescope. It's what's called a personal solar telescope. It's made by Coronado, which used to be under Meade. I don't know what to be. I haven't looked at what's going to happen to Coronado, because Meade owns Coronado, and well, then I think what was it? Ryan kind of holding Meade, so I don't know what's going to happen with the PST. But the PST in the early days, when everybody wanted to see what hydrogen alpha looked like through a solar filter, this was pretty much the cheapest option out there. So it is very portable. It's tiny though, so it's not a very big telescope. So Steve is holding one up there. Let's see. Yeah, Steve's holding one up there, and let's see. You can also buy other ones that have an additional hydrogen alpha filter. This is called filter stacking. So the PST comes in the bandpass that I was just talking about, 0.7 nanometers, but it also comes in 0.5, and basically that's just two hydrogen alpha solar filters stacked on top of each other to further narrow the bandpass to 10.656 nanometers. But anyway, that's one type of standalone solar scope. Here's another one that's it's probably not as popular, but it's very portable. I would almost equate this to like the Herschel Wedge hydrogen alpha solar filters. It's called the Quark. It's made by a company. Oh God, what's the name of that company? Can somebody help me out here? Oh gosh, I'll look it up. But anyway, Daystar, thank you. Yeah, it's made by Daystar, and they start at about $1,200, but you can use it on just by any kind of refractor. But again, the rules are, your refractor can only be but so big. So in the case of Daystar, they say don't use anything above a refractor that has a diameter or an aperture of 100 millimeters. So you have to keep it under 100 millimeters when you're using this. The only downside with this guy is that when you use it, it has a Barlow setting, and that's just the nature of the way this thing works. The Barlow, I think, is a 4.2x Barlow. So if you use it in a refractor that's like 1,000 millimeters, and we'll say that like the refractor is, I don't know, an f6, so it's going to have 6 times 100 millimeters, it's going to have a 600 millimeter wavelength. When you stick this guy in there, it's going to be a 2,400 millimeter image of the sun. So it's going to be very zoomed in. You won't be able to see the whole disk, most likely, in any kind of camera that you use. You're going to have to do a photo mosaic of it, where you just take pictures of it individually, and then you go in Photoshop or a PixInsight, whatever, and you assemble it together if you want to get a look at the whole thing. So that's one of the downsides of this. And but anyway, yeah, that's the Quark by Daystar. This is the one that I have right here, and Steve has one of these. Let me go ahead and go over this first, Steve, and you can show him what you got. But this is what's termed a pressure tune hydrogen alpha telescope. I've omitted that with the other two. Each one of these has to be tuned quote tuned so that the filter is able to pass through exactly at 656 nanometers. Okay, because what happens is that because the filter is so narrow, depending on the conditions of the place that you're in, or the environment that you're in, the wavelength of 656 nanometers can be off band a little bit. Okay, so what could be 656 nanometers in one place could be 656.2 at another place. So use this concept called tuning to bring that that solar wavelength, the hydrogen alpha wavelength, to center, so that you have the 656 nanometer wavelength coming into the telescope, and you can see what hydrogen alpha has to offer. So, but anyway, this uses pressure tuning. Here, let me go back to this guy right here. This uses what's called Atlan tuning, and what that is basically just these two interfering, I think, glass elements that refract the light so that it centers on 656 nanometers. I think that's how it works. But another way that you can tune it, the way the Quark does it, is that you can heat it up, because wavelengths can be refracted by heat or pressure, and that's what the other one will do. We'll get to that. But the Quark here heats up the eyepiece, or the module right here, so that you get the contrast of 656 nanometers more readily, and that's how you tune the Quark right here. Okay, now the only downside of it, you see the wire right here is, well, obviously if it has a heating element in it, you're going to need to supply it with power. Okay, and this adjusts how much heat that you put into it. You know, I guess kind of like your dial on a standard oven or stove at home. It goes from low to high, so you know, excuse me, whatever. Here, let me get a drink. Okay. Anyway, that's how that one works. It works by heat. Now, using, I think it's called Boyle's Law. Did I get that right, Steve? Heat and pressure, or temperature and pressure. Using Boyle's Law, you can also bend the light using pressure as well. And that's how this guy works. This is made by Lunt Solar Systems, the same company that made the Herschel Wedge that Steve was showing. And Lunt, I recommend Lunt only because that's all I have when it comes to observing the sun. I only have products made by Lunt, aside from the Mylar filter that I have, and the Continuum Filter. But anyway, these start at $750. That's the smallest one they have. I think the smallest one they have is 50 millimeter. They did have a 35 millimeter. I don't know what the deal is with that one, but they make it from 50 millimeters all the way up to, I think it's like 130 millimeters in aperture and size. The one I have is like this guy right here. It's an 80 millimeter aperture. So basically, the way it works is that you have your sunlight coming in through the front of the telescope, and it goes through this area right here before it reaches the hydrogen alpha filter. Okay, so if the light is off band, whereas the 656 nanometer wavelength isn't coming in square to go out to your eyeball if you're observing it, or out to your camera if you're imaging it, what you can do is you can adjust this guy. And right in here, what's going on in here, this is a chamber, it's an air chamber. And what you do is usually what I do, just as a standard practice, I take this knob off, unscrew it, and then I screw it back on. And what's going on is that there's air in here, and as I screw it tighter and tighter, the pressure is going up in there. And so that's how it moves the wavelength to being on band, so that you can see the contrasting features at 656 nanometers. That's hydrogen alpha. So comes in through here, you adjust it here so that you can get 656 nanometers to come into the eyepiece or the camera. And then back here you have a blocking filter. The blocking filter basically does just that. It tones down the brightness of of the sunlight that's coming through, because you need a blocking filter. Otherwise, sunlight's going to be, well, it'll destroy your eyeball, just like what we talked about. If you're just looking at the sun with no filter at all, and it'll also destroy your camera without it. So, Steve has a good image of what his little setup looks like. So I'm going to stop my share. Steve, you want to go ahead and show them what yours looks like?
Hey, Chris, I just looked at the website for Lund. They have a 152 millimeter that's about 10 grand, and they do have a 300 millimeter that's only 70 grand.
Only.
If you're
yeah.
Very good. Trading in a Tesla for that, I guess. I don't know. Okay, Steve, you ready? Your volume or your sound is off.
Okay. All right. This is the setup that I use for photography for this. And this is my 60 millimeter launch that has the pressure tuner, which is down here. You can't really see it. And then one of the things on it has is this is help you find the sun. This little cider thing that you can use to help find the sun. And I have a focuser on it that's like a focus electronically with the computer if I want. And then I have this ASI 174 mono camera that I use for solar imaging that's connected up to it. And then I have a Orion Solar Star Seeker tracking mount, which I put this on, and you turn this on and it has GPS in it, and it knows where it is and it knows what time it is and all of that. When you set it on the tripod, it's leveled tripod, you press a button and it finds the sun for you. And then you can watch the sun come in through this thing on this little white dot here, and the sun eventually just comes into that dot. And then it has little adjustments that you can get it absolutely centered into the eyepiece or whatever, or the camera, whatever you're using. And then it follows the sun. So I can keep this on the sun for at least an hour, probably 2 hours sometimes, depending on vibration and wind and things like that. And so for making videos of solar prominences and sunspots and things like that, this little tracker is pretty good. This is about as big a telescope as you can put on this, weight-wise. This is the system that I use. The eyepiece that Chris has on the picture that he had, they make a nice little adjustable eyepiece you can put into this to zoom in and out on the sun as well, and that's a nice thing to have if you have one of these things just going to be observing. But anyway, this is the setup that I use for the pictures I'll show you whenever Chris is ready for me to show those. But anyway, this is you can get multiple different kinds of focusers on it. This just happens to be the one that I bought a few years ago to put on it. You don't really have to have that, but if you want to get precise focus for doing imaging, then it's nice to have an electronic focuser. All right. But I've been very happy with the little tracking mount. I wouldn't put Chris's larger scope on here because I don't think it can handle the weight. But it seems to do right with the 60 millimeter. I can also put the Herschel Wedge on a regular refractor on this, and that works pretty well too. So anyway, that's the setup I have using the Atlan systems. Okay, Chris, back to you.
Thank you, Steve. Let's see there. All right, so yeah, so there you go. That's the pressure tuner, the Atlan solar system. A lot of there's quite a few members in this group that are in the club that have one. It seems like it's the most popular hydrogen alpha solar filter out there, or solar scope is probably the better term for this. So anyway, that's hydrogen alpha. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Calcium K. All right, so 393 nanometer. This wavelength is not as popular, but I was getting into solar imaging and just observing it. So I thought, let's go ahead and collect all three. So there you go. So calcium K, 393 nanometers. Like I said, it's pretty hard to see visually, but it's kind of the same as far as what activity you're seeing. It's the same as hydrogen alpha, as in you're going to see a chromospheric activity of ionized calcium instead of hydrogen alpha. Okay, so it blocks everything, just like any narrowband filter. It blocks everything except for the 393 nanometer filter, or excuse me, 393 nanometer wavelength. And the one I have is made by one. Let's see, I think it's on the next slide. Yeah, that's what it looks like right there. And it's actually this exact number, the B1200 right here. This number down here, 1200, the one makes it in B600, 1200, and 1800. There may be a 3400. I'm not sure. I don't think there is. But what that number stands for, it just stands for the the millimeter opening of the sunlight that's going to come in and through the blocking filter and the actual filter out here. So, but anyway, so this one has an opening inside that's only 12 millimeters. Now, you can go up and go to the blocking filter that's 1800. The B1800 module, which is 18 millimeters, and that's something I would recommend if you want to get into calcium K. That's something I would recommend getting if you're going to use a larger chip size camera that is bigger than the camera that Steve showed you. The one that Steve showed you, that's called the ASI 174mm. It's by ZWO as well, and actually it's also the exact same camera I use as well for solar imaging. I use another camera, but not very often. But anyway, so yeah, calcium K. It shows you all kinds of things. It shows you granulation. That's a little different from what you would see on in the white light filter or white light filter plus continuum filter. Shows sunspots just like the other two, and occasionally it actually does show you prominences. Okay, so hydrogen alpha does show you prominences. You have better luck seeing prominences with hydrogen alpha, but calcium K, you can pick them up sometimes if they're intense enough. They'll have, I guess, calcium flowing through those things as well. You'll see the prominences as well. So anyway, so that's calcium K, and I went over it, and kind of like the Quark module made by Daystar, this calcium K module made by Blunt Solar Systems. That's all there is to it. It's pretty much just a diagonal, and that's it. Just like your Daystar one I was just talking about, and just like your Herschel Wedge. It's just that. That's all there is. All there is to it. But once again, it works with refractors only, and also you need to pay attention to how much aperture you have in your refractor. You can't use large refractors with it. You can do what I was talking about earlier, use a stop-down mask and then use this thing with a larger refractor. But yeah, portable, obviously. It is expensive. They start out $1,000. I think mine was $1,400. But anyway, so yeah, so those are all the filters. Now we'll go move on to actually taking pictures. Well, what are the because we're all about imaging here. This is the one that I was just referring to earlier that Steve and I have. It's called the ZWO ASI 174mm, and that's probably one of the most popular cameras to use for solar, and I'll explain why over here. But kind of camera you want, just like most of the things are in this in the imaging hobby, mono is best because you're only looking at single wavelengths of light. And I mean, if you're using just a Mylar sheet, yeah, you're looking at all wavelengths because the Mylar filter is white light, so it's all wavelengths. But if you use a continuum filter on the front of that, or after that, it's going to be filtering for 540 nanometers. So you're only looking at one wavelength. So if you use a color camera with this, most color cameras have what's called a Bayer matrix, where every other pixel is red, green, and blue. But the matrix is actually 2x2, and in that 2x2 you have one pixel that's for red, that's filtered for red, one pixel that's filtered for blue, and then the other two are filtered for green. So I don't know, maybe a color camera, I've never tried it before, will work with the continuum filter, because continuum filter is is green, but all in all, getting down to a mono camera is what you want to use because you're just looking at wavelengths. But anyway, okay, so, but you're probably asking, like, well, why do all these images I see have color to them? Well, yeah, you want to do an accurate representation of what you're seeing through a scope, or you can just, show off and make it into eye candy and say, hey, isn't this pretty? So you can colorize your captures later. But anyway, the reason why this guy is popular is the type of shutter it has, okay? It has what's called a global shutter on it. The other kind of shutter that you'll run across in the hobby for the way that the cameras record data is what's termed a rolling shutter, okay? Global shutters, I guess the best way I can explain it is that the whole chip activates and takes an image, okay? Whether it be like a video recording, which is what you would do for planetary, and in our case, what we'll talk about tonight, solar. That's how global shutter work. It takes an image of the whole thing at once, okay, or the all the pixels that are on the chip take an image at once at the same time. So that's global. Whereas a camera that fires images with the other kind of shutter called a rolling shutter, it does it, incrementally all the way down. Now, yeah, of course, it's super instantaneous, but it's not the whole thing or activating at once. Okay, the chip is doing every row one by one after another, and so that's what they call a rolling shutter. And this can introduce what do you call it? An artifact that you'll see when you're recording it, and you'll also see it in your finished image if you use rolling shutter. It's called Newton rings, and you can kind of see that with if you were to take like your at least with all the cell phone cameras I've ever had. If you take your cell phone camera and you point it towards a really bright light source. Also, if you really, but you'll really notice it if you point it at like a computer monitor or a television monitor. It doesn't matter what kind of monitor. It could be CRT or it could be just regular flat screen. So you can point it at that, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Those little what are termed Newton rings if you use a rolling shutter camera. So you can process these out afterwards. You can use what some of you guys probably overheard at the beginning of the meeting when we weren't talking about the subject matter, called flats. You can get rid of them using flats if you want to do that. But anyway, the images we're going to show you tonight are all using a global shutter, and this is the camera I use, and as you saw with Steve, that's what he uses as well. Okay, the best software to use, of course, is Fire Capture. Well, I wouldn't say of course, but the most popular one to use is Fire Capture. I'm not going to give a demo of how that works tonight, but Fire Capture allows you to adjust all the important characteristics of your camera as you're taking the recording of the sun. Okay, when I say recording, as in it's a video, unlike deep sky images, you just take single frames. And in the case of solar imaging, you're taking a recording. A video, which, well, a video is just a series of stills anyway. So there you go. But when you're doing this, if you want to just focus on an area of interest, which in imaging circles is called a region of interest. So if you have your telescope pointed at the sun, you'll probably and you're just doing prime focus where you just stuck the actual camera into the telescope, you're probably just going to see the actual whole sun itself, the whole solar disk, as we would say. And you don't want to record all the blackness out here. So what you can go do in Fire Capture is you can define a region of interest and just block off a square around it. And what that will do is it'll allow the recording to run more smoothly because your computer's not having to work so hard in capturing all the pixels of the image. It's only capturing the region of interest only. So that'll save you on some real estate of all the CPU runtime that can be swallowed by a whole frame recording. Just take a region of interest, and your computer won't have to work as hard. So when you're recording all of your images for solar, you want the histogram that you'll see in Fire Capture to be 75 to 80%. Okay. I'm just going to run through this really quickly because I'm not going to do a fire capture example tonight. But another thing you can do is you can set the fire capture to auto histo. And what that does is it adjusts the gain of the recording over time. So this helps out a lot if you want to do a time lapse. That way, you know, if a cloud or if you get just a little bit of haze that passes in front of the object, or in the case what we're talking about, the sun, the histogram will dim a little bit and go below 75, like I'm recommending here. If you set it auto histo, it'll adjust the gain to whatever you decide to set it the histogram to. So say, like you said, 75, and the cloud passes through. Obviously, the histo is going to go down, but fire capture will adjust it and keep it at 75. So that's nice. And for me, I just keep things simple, and I just record 1,000 frames. So make a recording, a video recording that records 1,000 frames. So if you have, if you're recording at 10 frames per second, well, you want to record it for 100 seconds. Basically, is what I'm getting at. But anyway, next you feed it into a stacking program. Like the most popular stacking program for deep sky objects is auto stacker. That's what we have here. Is Pix Insight. When it comes to like planets, the moon, surface of the moon, and the sun, we use auto stacker. Okay. And I take that recording that I have that has 1,000 frames recorded, I stick it in there and I process it. And I usually only keep 200 of the best frames. Now, 200 of the best frames, what do I mean by that? Well, you know what the concept of seeing is in astronomy. If you go outside and look up at the stars and you see it flickering, that usually means that the seeing that night is kind of bad. Now, the same thing can happen with the sun, is that when you're imaging the sun, you'll see a sort of rippling effect that's similar to what you would see with the convection coming off of the roof of a car in the middle of the summertime. You'll see that little wavy effect. That's something that will happen, and you want to get rid of the frames where that waviness is really bad. And so what I do is I get rid of the 800 frames that are not so good, and I just stack the 200 frames. Then I go into Photoshop, I sharpen it, colorize it, curves, and curves, which means that if I want to like bring out a structure that's not very bright, like prominences, I can adjust it by curving, and then I put in finishing touches. Like I said, we're doing this with a monocam, so it's going to be black and white. We want to, you know, make it artsy or just give a representation of what the wavelength actually looks like. If you were to look at it with your eye, you can colorize it. So anyway, are there any questions before I show you some other things? Nope. Okay. Let's see. Let me go to
Chris, I have a question about the blocking filters. Can you, we're just taking a quick look at the Luntz solar systems. Could you explain briefly like the difference between the values, like the B400 versus B600? Like, why would I want one over another?
Okay. Well, okay. So, yeah. So it goes back to the opening size I was talking about. Like the one I have for hydrogen alpha is a B1800, which means that the opening that the sunlight's coming through is only 18 millimeters in size. So if you put a camera in there, the camera cannot be 18 millimeters larger than any dimension. It can't be 18 millimeters wide. The camera chip can't be 18 millimeters wider or higher or whatever, you know. So you would want something, but if it's like smaller, then you can buy a cheaper blocking filter. Like you can go the next size down, because I have the B1800 for hydrogen alpha. Well, I used the ASI 174 mm for calcium K, because I did some research, and yeah, the calcium K module I have is a B1200. So the blocking opening is 12 millimeters, and it's wide enough, just wide enough for the ASI 174 mm camera that I use. So basically, that's what I'm getting at. So if you were to like, say, like if you were to take a DSLR and you were to hook it up to one of those two blocking filters I just talked about, well, obviously the sensor or the chip on the DSLR camera is going to be bigger than 18 millimeters. Okay, so you can put it in there, and the middle of your of your frame will be fine, but the outer edges is going to start, it'll fade all the way to black. Why? Because, well, the opening that you're setting the camera into is not big enough to accommodate that large chip. So that large imaging chip. So does that answer your question pretty much?
Yeah, it does. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Very good. Let's see. All right. So any other questions before I start sharing other screens here? No? Okay. All right. So the next thing I'm going to go to is I'm just going to show you quickly something I already processed in AutoStacker, actually in the actual AutoStacker program. So this is AutoStacker right here, and this is what the interface looks like. Basically, you can use, like I said, you can use this for a moon, solar, like we're talking about right now, or you can use it for planetary. And so I fed it into the program, and I had it set here to pick only 200 of the best frames. Okay.
Chris, I'm not seeing all this.
Yeah, I'm not seeing anything here.
Not seeing it? Okay.
I'm not.
What do you see? Let me ask you that.
It says
Black.
started
See dark-
screen share. Not-
Darkness.
It's just darkness?
Yeah.
Okay, let me try this again. Okay. Let's see. What about this? Can you see that?
Yes. Now
Yes.
okay.
Okay. All right. So, all right. I guess this. I didn't think this would be a problem in Zoom because AutoStacker opens two windows simultaneously. So, oh well. Well, anyway. So this is a hydrogen alpha recording that I had just processed right before the meeting, or just stacked before the meeting. But if you look right here, you can just barely see some prominence activity right in here. Okay. This was actually taken about 3 weeks ago, this coming weekend, and there was a nice little sunspot right here and some activity going on around it. And so looks nice, but it's black and white. Who cares? So let's process it so that we can actually get something that's actually likable per se. All right, so I'm gonna stop share there, and then I'm gonna go into Photoshop. Let's see, where is Photoshop on here? Hopefully you're going to see this one. Okay, so can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Here, let me, all right, good. The actual toolbar for Zoom is in the right here. Okay, so this was the image that you just saw, and one of the things that you'll notice with, not just with Photoshop, but with most of the images that you get after stacking, processing, and or registering and then stacking, it'll spit out your final image. And this is where you start to do the manipulations to bring out details that you just cannot see, but are actually there. Here, the first thing I do with hydrogen alpha is I sharpen it, okay? Because you can see here, it looks like it's blurry, but you can see like the crispiness between the tones. So that tells me that this thing can be sharpened. So what I'll do is this is all in Photoshop, so there's equivalents of this in PixInsight as well. But I usually use Smart Sharpen. This is the settings I use. I only set it to 50% because I want to do gradual sharpening. If I move this all the way up, it well, yeah, it looks a little better, but when you get down to it, it's not the best in the world. So I like to set it to 50. So I'm just typing it in actually. So I use it, leave it at 50. The radius, I just leave it at 2. So we'll just sharpen it that much, okay? So I can tell it sharpened it, but I can tell that I can probably sharpen it more without going overboard. So I'm going to do it again. There's a repeat operation here for the last filter that you used, and in that case it's Smart Sharpen, so it's going to sharpen it by 50% again. So it's starting to look better. Probably do it again. Maybe I'll do it one more time. Okay, there you go. So you see, it looks a lot better. Now, you can actually start to see the prominence better right here, actually. And next, what I do is I colorize it. And I have these, I use these actions here, and I'm doing this for time's sake, mostly for the presentation. But what I can do is I can send, I'll try to put these in a Dropbox, and people can download them, and you can just use them if you want. You know, try processing solar images in Photoshop. But this is what I use to like colorize my hydrogen alpha images. I also use it for my calcium K images. I use it for the solar continuum images. So in this case, I'm just going to do it for hydrogen alpha. Click, and there we go. Okay, so that looks kind of decent. Sometimes, depending on the sky conditions or the way it was the stacking program worked or the recording, whatever, it doesn't get it exactly the way I want it. And so what I'll do is I'll do select the colors. So this is mostly I do a lot of tweaking with hydrogen alpha a lot, just because of how dynamic and chaotic it looks at the same time. So in this case, I'll probably just increase the reds a little bit right there. So it darkens a little bit right here. And then let's see, I guess I'll go to yellows and see what that does. I'll make them redder. Let's see. Like that. And then, so brighten up the image. It started to overwhelm it a little bit. So I'll just go to levels or curve and do curves instead. See, do curves. Now this little guy right here, these are the dimmest shades in this photo, okay, or in this image. So the dimmest shades here are actually features that you can't see very well. In this case, the provinces. That's why when I go over it with my cursor, you see it jumping around there on the graph of curves. So what I'll do is I'll just bring it up just a tad, so that you can start to see the provinces a little better. But what that does in return is it starts to brighten up these, and I don't want that. So usually all I do is I just go like that, and probably should lower this just a little bit. That's too far over for it. That's something like that. Okay. So there you go. That's how I bring out the features of the provinces right there. And then finally, to balance this right here, because it's a little on the flat side, I use levels. And I like to use gamma a little bit. You need to be careful with gamma, because what gamma, that's what the center slider is for. It'll basically it deletes shades. Okay, so you need to keep that in mind. So anyway, yeah, and it tones down the excessiveness of all the tones and contrasts it a little better. So anyway, so that's how I do hydrogen alpha. So we'll close that. Nope. All right, so this is continuum right here. It's the same day, but the continuum wavelength, and I'm just going to actually here, I'll go ahead and do the sharpening again. So brought out. Oh, no more actually. Yeah, there you go. So got all the granulation showing up. You can see the halo going around the actual sunspot right here. These are the little areas right here that can pulse over time. It's very subtle though. It's nowhere near as dramatic as hydrogen alpha. But if you want to do a time lapse with a continuum filter, you can focus on something like that and just stare at it for a few hours. Then I go in it and I colorize it, and you'll notice that continuum filter wavelength. Well, remember it's green. Everybody does it yellow, so I'm going to do it yellow too. Get over it. But anyway, okay, so that's usually how I do the continuum. That one's really easy to process. There's not much to it. Let's see, nope. And then finally, there's calcium K. Calcium K, the downside of calcium K is that because it's such a short wavelength, the atmosphere punishes it badly. So shorter wavelengths don't get scattered more easily through the atmosphere than longer wavelengths. So I think that's as much as I'll sharpen it, and then I got to colorize it, and bam, that's what I get right there. So if I were to, like, I was trying to make a point earlier, you can look visually at all the wavelengths, continuum, and we call it hydrogen alpha, but calcium K is really hard to see. If I were to simulate what you would see through the scope, it would look probably something like that. So it'd be really hard to see what you're looking at. It's not that easy at all. It's a little more luminous than this, but it's just not very contrasty at all. So Anyway, that's how I process my images. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Let me look at some other things here. Finally, here's probably my favorite solar sequence. I'm just going to show you some of my stuff right here. Do you guys see that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So these weren't processed very well, but this is back when I was first learning still, or I was still learning how to process images. And but there was this period here in North Carolina back during July and August of, let's see, it says it up here. Yeah, 2016. And it was sunny every day. And I was like, cool. And I started noticing this. And so what I did is I just brought my hydrogen alpha set up to work during the lunch hour, just went out, took an image of it, and that was it. And so what eventually happened is I was able to get a rotation of the sun as time went by, day by day. So the sun, if I remember correctly, it rotates does a complete rotation. I think it's every 25 days. So it was looking like I was going to make it, but I didn't. Finally, clouds got the best of me, and I had to start all over again. And so I was just like, oh, okay, well, whatever. Maybe someday I'll get a complete rotation. But you saw in this image that we had one nice little active region here with a sunspot, and here on this day there was a flare event, really bright intensity right there of hydrogen alpha light coming through, whereas here it's not as bright. We'll close this and let's see. We'll go and I'll show you that area up close. So there's that area up close. So anyway, so that's as it was coming off the surface. These are different sizes. But anyway, so there's that active region, and then bam, there's yourself a flare. So huge difference. There was a flare event going on then. So that was most likely during the weekday. Had I known that was going to happen, I probably had called in sick and just recorded it, and we could have saw it in real time. It would have been really cool to see. But anyway, I just tracked it as it went across the scene. So anyways, that's all I have to show. What I'll do is, let me go ahead and I think I still have it. This is the link to a photo album I set up for all my solar imaging, all my solar images that I have on Flickr, so you can look at that at your leisure. But anyway, okay, Steve, you wanted to show us something? Okay, your sound is off again.
No, it's on now, I think.
Okay, yeah, you are.
Let me share here real quick. All right. All right, these are done relatively recently, a couple of weeks ago when we started having some activity on the sun, which has been very quiet. So this is just with that setup that I showed you. And actually, I've got these in kind of the wrong order. That was the night before that one, or the day before that one, and that's another day with a slight orientation change of the camera. So these are all, I took probably 2,000 frames and processed them in AutoStacker and Photoshop, just like Chris described. And then that's this. I put a 2.5 Barlow on the camera, and so I could zoom in on that spot to get it. That's one thing you can do. It's a little harder for the mount to track it when you've got a Barlow on it, but it works. And so you can get much closer to structures and things like that. Then this was done probably a year and a half ago. I set the camera up, and in fire capture you can tell it to take a bunch of images and then wait a while and take a bunch more images, a movie and do it over a number of hours. And so this was over a couple of hours, and on a prominence that was doing some interesting things. And so I made a movie of it. It's an enormous amount of work to process all these, but in AutoStacker you can tell it. You can process one until you like it, and then you can do the exact same processing to all the other ones that you have in there, and it'll produce all them all. And then you can take all those images and produce a movie from that. And so it's fun to watch and see the little funny motions going on. And this is a lot of fun to do. And again, this is with a 2.5 Barlow again. So it's it takes a little effort to get it to track, but it works. There's another one. You can see some motion in here. And you can see some things changing up here as time goes on. And then this is just one of the images from that movie, processed with a little more sharpening and that sort of thing. And then this is transit of Mercury. It was Mercury there, and of course the problem was the clouds were coming in and out during that period of time. So that's but it's fun to watch the clouds go across.
But, Steve, was that near the end of that?
It's somewhere in the middle, I think.
Okay. Well, no, I think the reason why I say that is because where I was, it was just like the last 30 minutes of the transit was clear. And I was like, yeah, wouldn't you know? So,
My driveway in Durham, so. And then there's Mercury again. Now, for images like this, where you have the prominences and the surface, I take two sessions. First, I do it for the surface, and then I do another one because you can't see these things when you're exposing for the surface. So then I turn up the exposure so I can see the prominences, but the surface becomes just white. You can't see anything on the surface. And so this is actually two things put together so that you can see both of them at the same time. That involves a bit more processing. Okay, now this is the solar eclipse from Tennessee that Chris talked about earlier when we were there. And then these are the Bailey's beads and the diamond ring. This is all done with a camera on a telescope. Well, actually, that was done with my camera with a 400 millimeter lens on it, actually. And put them together in one image. And then this is one of the partial eclipses before that. And there were some sunspots on the sun that particular day.
so that was with the Mylar filter, though, right?
This would have been with a filter on the camera, yes.
Yeah. So Mylar filter, and see, that was one of the nice things about this is that you had one. If you wanted to get your focus absolutely perfect, what was nice about this this event is that there were sunspots.
Actually, it wasn't with the Mylar, it was with a neutral density filter, a very neutral density filter.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, it's a camera, or a camera lens, not a telescope. Okay. Well, yeah.
And then there's again, but with you can see one of the stars sitting next to the sun there in that one. And then this is done with a solar can. It's just like a can that has a hole in it and has photographic paper in it, and you set it up and you aim it towards the sun, and then you just let it sit there. And so this is starting out, the sun's coming up, and then these are clouds going across the sun at that time, and then there's the dwindling of it, and there's the eclipse right there, and then it comes back out again. So that's just the path of the sun for about 3 hours that day. It's just a can sitting there, a pinhole camera, basically, sitting there taking.
That was such a good idea, Steve. Yeah, that's something I wish I would have thought of.
And then there we are. There I am, and there's Chris, all set up in John's relative's yard in Iota, Tennessee. So, and then that's a Mercury transit again, and just a different orientation. Let's see. And then these are, I've been going back to like 2017 when I was starting to do this, the same kind of deal, where you take a picture for the surface and then you take a picture for the prominences and you put them together in Photoshop. And there's another one, and another one. And that's not very interesting. And that's going all the way back to probably 5 or 6 years ago when I first started out doing. This may have been done with the Coronado telescope and not the Luck. And there's some more just going. These are all going way back in a number of years now.
That's a nice one right there.
Yeah, and then this is with this is probably with this white light filter one. Yeah, that's with a white light filter. That's what you'll see. Mostly you just see the sunspots and not much else on that. I think that's all I have. But I like to do weird things like make movies and stuff like that. So it's kind of fun to play with.
Okay,
Right.
let me show some things right here. This is something I left out, but there's two websites that I recommend, or that's my stuff. Right here, this is the Gong Network, and let me see. I'll post this in chat. So this is a really good site to go to if you want to see what's going on live in hydrogen alpha on the sun at the time. But yeah, and it updates itself periodically, and you can also like watch individual frames that it takes over a period of time and kind of see like a time lapse of what had been happening. And there's this guy right here. This is Space Weather. I go to this all the time, and it's pretty comprehensive about well, space weather. I mean, even down here, and that's not related to our topic. Talks about all the asteroids that are close by and whatnot. But anyway, yeah, so there's that. That's space weather. I guess well, that's easy to remember. I won't paste that. So let's see. Okay, well, I just want to show two things from Maya gallery. So that was probably the best prominence I had seen in a long time. And that was back, well, such a infamous date in history, 9/11 of this year. Let's see, then there's this one that I wanted to show, because if you remember earlier on in the talk, I was talking about how calcium K does show prominences occasionally. Okay, so that's just something if you're interested in calcium K. It's a nice little treat that you can have on the side if it happens to show it. It's not very common, but when you do see it, it's always a pleasure. So, but yeah, that day I compared the two. Here's what hydrogen alpha looks like, and here's what the calcium K one looks like. It looks a tad different, not by much, but anyway, it was great. So for those who don't understand what's going on here, the black here, that's just where the surface was just blown out white in color. And if I went and colorized it, it probably would have been a yellow color over here. It probably been a pale bright blue color. But yeah, usually what a lot of people do when they just want to focus on draw your attention to prominences, they just make the rest of the image black, the rest of the surface of the sun black. So anyway, so that's that. All right, I guess that's it with our presentation. Are there any questions? No?
Well, not a question, but I love this. I've been looking at the solar stuff without any like context for things, and this was tremendously helpful just to be able to understand the relationship between them and what you might want to use when and how. So thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I mean, have you considered? I mean, have you already invested in some solar equipment?
I'm sorry?
Have you already invested in some solar equipment?
No, I have Mylar.
Mylar filter thing. Okay.
Yeah, I've got one for my 8-inch SET and for my 80 millimeter.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, do you have a camera yet?
I just use my Canon 6D.
Oh, okay, Canon 60. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of a big. I was going to recommend you get a Continuum Filter, but that's kind of expensive for a DSLR. But anyway, but yeah. So if you ever want to get into recording it, yeah, ASI 174mm is the best camera out there, or I won't say it's necessarily the best. It's the most common one used out there. It's the most easiest one to use for solar. You can use it for planetary too, but there are other better options out there. But yeah, for solar, ASI 174 is what I recommend. Okay, so is that it? Anybody else have any questions?
I'm just there with a thank you as well. This was my first experience with RAC, and it was really cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Good. I'm glad you got something out of it. So, but anyway, okay. I guess that's it. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and I'll move on to. Actually, no, I'll keep it going. We'll move on to non-solar stuff. That's what the next part of our each of our meetings is we show off old images that we have taken since last time or whatever. So I don't have anything to show, so I'm going to assume Steve or Naveen, you may have something to show.
Not really, no, because I haven't had any decent weather.
Okay, all right. What about you, Naveen?
Yeah, I always seem to have something.
Okay, all right.
All right, give me a moment. So I'm going to start with solar, as I just tried solar imaging in the last month. I took my kids had an 8-inch Dobsonian. I put a dovetail on it and mounted it on my EQ6R Pro. And this is set up.
Looking.
It is wild. It is not the most. It's very unwieldy, but I've done a little bit of planetary, just playing around, and I decided a couple weeks ago to point it at the sun because I was walking the dogs and it was super clear out. I'm like, you know what? I should just try this. And I used a ASI 120 MCS, which is a planetary color camera. So not the best thing in the world for solar, I'm learning, but I was able to get this guy, which was pretty cool first for me. A couple of sunspots and whatever the granulation.
Yeah, that's granulation.
So it was, I'd say, a successful experiment, and I'm now looking at all these things I'm learning today. So thank you, Chris.
You're welcome. Hope it doesn't burn a hole in your pocket.
So I have to compete for my my deep sky pocketbook too. Which I have some pictures I can show of that stuff as well. And we saw a little bit of it before, but so I got the monochrome camera recently, but I still was using an ASI 533 MC Pro, which is a cooled color camera. It's got a small sensor. This, I think, was about 6 hours of Triangulum Galaxy. Finally, I'd forgotten I took it like in September or something. Finally processed it a couple weeks ago. This one is Wizard Nebula, same camera. I've been collecting data for a while and then fighting with the processing, throwing away what I was doing because everything I came up with, just the background, I was trying too hard with the colors to make something pop.
Yeah, I think the only problem with this thing is it's just very blotchy. So you're going to have to deal with color noise here. I don't know if it'll help. Do you have Photoshop?
No.
Okay. Yeah, there's a noise reduction option in there. And for something like this, I wouldn't reduce any of the noise, but there's a box you can tick there that'll just get rid of the color noise only.
Okay.
I'm not sure Pix Insight has something like that. It's got it.
Yeah, it's some of the denoising I was trying with, like TGVD, where it was actually introducing splotchiness, like small wavelets of color noise. And this is the best I've been able to get out of it. Still not quite 100% there, but.
Yeah, Beat, if you want, I've been using the Topaz Sharpen AI and Topaz Noise AI.
Okay.
Those seem to be pretty good.
Okay, let me make a note.
If you want to email me an image, I can try to see if I can do anything with it. And though we're using those two things, I just find them easier to use than the Pix Insight noise reduction stuff. Sometimes they just don't do anything interesting, but sometimes they really will do a nice job. So
Yeah, I tried a trial of the denoise a while ago, but it was probably a little bit too early in my experience with processing.
denoise AI, they call it. Now, it's a little bit different than their original denoise. So,
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
well, you can do trial versions of it. So get the trial versions and get those to try and see what you think.
Okay.
But I've had some reasonable luck with those.
Cool. So we were looking at this before we started the session today. So the Elephant Trunk Nebula in Hubble Palette. This one I started taking this picture for a comparison between the color camera and the new monochrome camera. So I just kind of centered it. I didn't do anything fancy, like just point it at the middle of the nebula and take pictures.
Are you using a filter with the color camera, or?
I have a L Extreme.
Yeah, I do too. I was just, that's,
Yeah, it's a good filter for the one-shot colors. Heart Nebula. This is well, my background's a different palette. I'll show that one next. This is a 2-panel mosaic. Having something weird with how the panels line up that I got to figure out. And then there's a slightly different processing that I really like the coloring on. And then playing around with different palettes. This is a combination of a couple different things for the Soul Nebula. My favorite thing about this is I didn't realize this little guy, can I rotate? Anyway, rotate counterclockwise 90 degrees. This is called I think the Galactic Hiker. It's like 2 mountains and a guy.
I can see that. There's what if I were to make a word just based on what you're saying, if you were to go back to the Elephant Nebula, there's what I like to term the Galactic Pizza Guy.
In which one?
In the Elephant Nebula.
All right, I gotta find it. Where?
Okay, right where your cursor, you're about to get there. Right down where your cursor, there's a man running with a pizza.
Oh,
And then,
oh, that's awesome.
And then you go right to the center of the nebula and look at it around between 10 to 11 o'clock. There's a frog right there.
Oh, it's top.
It's pointing down like 45. It's jumping 45 degrees down, kind of. My wife made that out to me. So like, oh wow, yeah.
I love those kinds of structures. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Veil Nebula, I want to do another panel below this, do a mosaic. This is another one where I was like, well, I've taken this with the L Extreme and the one-shot color, doing smaller panels. But this turned out pretty good. Pleiades, just color RGB.
You didn't use a filter for that?
This was just red, green, and blue filters.
Okay, right.
On the monochrome camera. I don't remember how long I was able to get. And then Orion, again, just color. I want to get some hydrogen alpha, but I've got time.
Oh yeah, you got plenty of time for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's it. Okay. All right. So I guess that wraps it up. Something I've talked about last time that I'll probably I didn't mention it to the whole group is picking out a deep sky object that everybody can go after in the club, and then at a given time we'll just show off our results and see what happened, and then learn from each other what works, what doesn't work. So anyway. Okay, well, it's been nice. Everybody have a nice evening, and I will see you in November.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Good night.
Okay, everyone. Thank you.